To everyone at Hartwell and Kane, I was just the new girl. The one who still got lost looking for the supply closet, who brought the wrong coffee order twice in the same week, who smiled too wide in the elevator because she didn't know what else to do. I'd been at the firm for 11 days when I found out that the man whose career I was about to save had no idea I existed. His name was Warren Holt. Senior partner, 43 years old, the kind of man who walked into a room and made the air feel different. Not loud about it, not flashy, just present in a way most people aren't. I'd seen him exactly 4 times. Once in the lobby, once through the glass wall of the main conference room, once when he passed my desk without glancing down, and once when I handed him a folder he'd asked his assistant to retrieve. He said thank you. He meant it. That was enough for me to pay attention. I wasn't supposed to be in the building that Thursday evening. My shift technically ended at 6. But I'd made an error in the Caldwell filing, a small one, the kind my supervisor might not catch for days, but the kind that would snowball if I left it. And so at 7:15, I was still at my desk on the 14th floor, the office nearly empty around me, fixing what I'd broken. The cleaning crew had come and gone. The overhead lights had dimmed to their after-hours setting. Outside the windows, Chicago was doing what Chicago does in October. The wind off the lake pressing against the glass like something alive. I heard them before I saw them. Not an argument. Something quieter than that, which was actually worse. 2 men in the small conference room at the end of the hall, the one nobody used because the projector was broken. The door wasn't fully closed. I wasn't trying to listen. I was gathering my jacket from the coat rack near the hallway, keys already in my hand, and their voices drifted out before I had any chance to decide whether I wanted to hear them. He signs it Monday and it's done. That was a voice I didn't recognize. Low, certain, the kind of certain that doesn't need to raise itself. We move before he figures out the Meridian clause. And if he reads the full addendum, he won't. Patrick never reads past the summary page. You know that as well as I do. A pause. Then, he trusts you. He trusts everyone. That's his problem. I stood very still in the hallway. Patrick. There was only one Patrick at Hartwell and Kane who would matter in a conversation like that. Patrick Holt, Warren's younger brother. The one who'd brought Warren into the firm 15 years ago. The one whose name came first on the original founding documents. The one Warren had stood beside at every company anniversary dinner in the framed photographs that lined the reception wall. I didn't know the other voice. I told myself later that I should have walked away, that it wasn't my place, that I was 11 days into a job I desperately needed and I had no context, no proof, no standing whatsoever to insert myself into something I didn't understand. I told myself all of that. Then I went back to my desk, opened the firm's document system, and found the Meridian contract. I had to search 3 folder levels deep. The file was labeled with a project code I didn't recognize, not the client name, which meant it wasn't meant to be found easily. I opened the main agreement first, 46 pages, dense, formatted the way contracts are when someone wants the important parts to disappear inside the unimportant ones. Then I opened the addendum. It took me 20 minutes to find it, buried in Section 11, subsection C, in language that was almost identical to the surrounding paragraphs, except for one phrase that changed the entire meaning of everything before it. The clause transferred the controlling interest of a subsidiary company, one that Warren had built from the ground up, separately from the firm, before he and his brother had ever gone into business together, to a holding entity that I had never heard of. The transfer would trigger automatically upon signature of the main agreement. And the holding entity, when I traced the registration number through the Illinois Secretary of State database, was registered to a name I recognized from the firm's internal org chart. Not Patrick Holt. Patrick's attorney, a man named Gerald Foss, who had represented Patrick personally, not the firm, for over a decade. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I looked up Warren Holt's personal email on the firm directory. Associates weren't supposed to have access to partner personal contacts. I had access because I'd been assigned to update the directory my first week, and nobody had thought to restrict my editing permissions yet. I wrote 3 sentences. I deleted them. I wrote 2 more. I deleted those too. Finally I typed, Mr. Holt, I'm an associate on the 14th floor. I've come across something in the Meridian Addendum that I think you need to see before Monday. I'm sorry to contact you this way. Please don't sign anything until we've spoken. I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. Then I sat there, in the dimmed office, with the Chicago wind against the glass, and waited to see what I'd just done to my career. He replied in 4 minutes. Which addendum? Who are you? Not a question, just the words, no punctuation, the way people type when they're trying to figure out whether to be angry. I told him my name. I told him the file path. I told him about Section 11, Subsection C, and the holding entity, and Gerald Foss. He didn't reply after that. For 9 minutes, nothing. I started to think I'd misread everything. The clause, the conversation, all of it. I started composing the resignation letter in my head, the one I'd have to hand in first thing Friday morning, before they fired me for accessing documents outside my clearance and emailing a senior partner at 8:30 at night. Then my desk phone rang. I didn't know desk phones still rang after 7. Apparently Warren Holtz did. I picked up. "Stay where you are," he said. "I'm coming down." He arrived in 6 minutes. He wasn't wearing his jacket. That was the first thing I noticed. That he'd left it somewhere. That he'd walked through the building without it, which meant he'd left in a hurry. His sleeves were rolled up. He looked like a man who had just been told something he already half knew and had been hoping wasn't true. He sat down in the chair across from my desk without being invited. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked at the contract on my screen, scrolled to Section 11 himself, read it. I watched his face do the thing faces do when the mind is catching up to something the gut understood a long time ago. "How long have you been with the firm?" he asked. 11 days. He looked at me then. Really looked, the way he hadn't in the lobby or the elevator, or any of the other times I'd been invisible to him. "Why did you email me instead of going to HR?" "Because HR reports to the managing partners. Your brother is a managing partner." He was quiet for a moment. "You figured that out in..." He checked the timestamp on my email. 40 minutes. I had the directory open already. He almost smiled. It didn't reach anywhere. "What's your name again?" "Raina," I said. "Raina Vasquez." He nodded slowly, like he was filing it somewhere important. "Okay, Raina Vasquez, tell me everything you heard." So I did. I told him about the voices in the conference room. I told him I hadn't seen who the second man was, only heard him. I told him what they'd said about Patrick, about Monday, about the summary page. I told him I might be wrong about all of it, that I was new, that I didn't have full context, that it was possible there was an explanation I wasn't seeing. He shook his head slowly while I was still talking, the way you shake your head not to disagree, but because you don't need to hear more. "There's no explanation," he said, almost to himself. "I'm sorry. Don't be." He leaned back. He was looking at the window now, not at me. "Don't be sorry. You did exactly the right thing." He said it like he meant it, like the words cost him something. Here is what I didn't know yet. Sitting there on the 14th floor, with my jacket still over my arm and my keys still in my hand, Warren and Patrick Holt had built this firm together, 22 years ago, in a rented office space above a dry cleaner on Michigan Avenue, with 2 desks and 1 paralegal they shared on alternating Tuesdays. They had grown it from nothing. They had given up other offers, other lives, other versions of themselves, and poured all of it into Hartwell and Kane. The firm was Warren's whole adult identity. It was the thing he'd chosen when he could have chosen anything. And the subsidiary, the one listed in the addendum, the one whose controlling interest was about to be quietly transferred to his brother's personal attorney, was the company Warren had started at 26, before any of this. A small investment vehicle that had grown, over the years, into something worth considerably more than it had been. Warren had kept it separate from the firm deliberately. It was the one thing that was entirely his. I didn't know any of that Thursday night. I learned it slowly, over the weeks that followed, in pieces, the way you learn things you were never meant to know. What I did know, sitting across from him, in the empty office, was that something had broken in him, and he wasn't letting it show. That took a kind of discipline I recognized. I'd seen it in my mother after my father left, the way some people learn to hold very still while something tears. "What happens now?" I asked. He looked back at me. "Now I make a phone call." He stood up, straightened his shirt with the automatic gesture of a man who is always aware of how he presents himself, even when the audience is one junior associate at 8:30 on a Thursday. And you go home. And you don't talk to anyone about this. Of course. I mean anyone. Raina. Not your friends, not your roommate, not your mother. I understand. He picked up his phone. Then he stopped. Are you parked in the structure? I take the Lel. It's late. Take a car. I'll have my assistant send you a credit. He paused. Actually, I'll send it myself. What's your number? I gave it to him. I watched him type it into his phone with the focused economy of someone who does not waste motion. Thank you, he said. Not the throwaway thank you from the folder handoff. This one had weight. You would have caught it, I said. He looked at me for a second. Maybe. He didn't say yes. He left. I sat there for another minute, not entirely sure what had just happened. Then I gathered my things, turned off my monitor, and took the elevator down to the lobby where the night security guard was watching a game on his phone and barely looked up as I pushed through the revolving door into the October wind. I didn't sleep well that night. I don't think Warren Holt did either. The weekend passed. I didn't hear anything. I went to the farmer's market on Saturday morning like I always did, bought apples and a bunch of flowers I didn't need, came home and cleaned my apartment and tried to read a book. I kept picking up my phone and putting it down. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Confirmation maybe, that the whole thing was real and I hadn't imagined it. Sunday evening, a text from a number not in my contacts. Monday's meeting has been postponed indefinitely. You don't need to do anything. I read it 4 times. Then I went back to my book and I actually read it. For the first time all weekend, because something had loosened in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. Monday at the firm was strange in the way that things are strange when something has shifted but no one is talking about it. Patrick Holt wasn't in the building. His assistant said he was working from home. His calendar showed a full day of external meetings. Neither thing was unusual on its own. Together they felt deliberate. Warren was there. I saw him cross the lobby at 8:50, jacket on, coffee in hand, moving with the same steady purpose he always had. He glanced toward the bank of elevators, caught my eye for half a second, gave me a nod that no one watching would have read as anything other than a senior partner, acknowledging a junior associate in passing. I gave him a small nod back. That was the whole of it. That was enough. The Meridian contract I found out later. Not from Warren, but from the general circulation email that went out 2 weeks after, had been sent back to opposing counsel for structural revisions. It was a polite phrase that meant it was dead. The deal would never close, not in that form, not with that addendum buried inside it. I also found out, much later, and not from any official source, that Gerald Foss had quietly resigned his representation of Patrick Holt, that Patrick and Warren had met privately on Monday afternoon, in a conference room I couldn't see from my desk, and that whatever was said in that room had taken 45 minutes and left Patrick looking like a man who had stepped off a curb, expecting solid ground, and found air instead. I don't know exactly what Warren said to his brother. I don't know if they yelled or if they were very quiet about it, which is sometimes worse. What I know is that Patrick Holt turned in his resignation to the firm's board 6 days later. The announcement framed it as a mutual decision, a new chapter, an opportunity to pursue other interests. Nobody on the 14th floor believed it for a second, but nobody said that out loud, because that's how these things go. 3 weeks after Thursday night, Warren Holt appeared at my desk at 4:15 in the afternoon. I looked up. He was in full jacket and tie, which meant he'd been in client meetings. He had a folder in one hand and the expression of a man who has decided something and is in the process of executing it. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. "Of course." He sat down, again without being invited, which I'd started to understand was just how he occupied space. Not rudeness, but comfort. The ease of a man who has always been welcome wherever he goes. He put the folder on my desk. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "It's a reassignment," he said, "if you want it." I looked at the paper. It was a transfer to the M&A division, 2 floors up, at a salary that made me read the number twice to make sure I wasn't misreading a decimal. "That's..." I stopped. "It's what that position pays," he said, reading my expression. "It's not a favor. You'd be doing actual work. Hard work. Long hours, travel, some weekends. The team is demanding. I know you didn't do what you did for this. His voice was even, direct. And I'm not doing this because I feel like I owe you something. I'm doing it because I watched you think clearly under pressure in a situation where most people would have walked away. And I want people like that 2 floors up from where you are. I was quiet for a moment. My brother, he said, was going to take something I built before I ever trusted anyone enough to build anything together. Something that had nothing to do with the firm. Just mine. He stopped, rearranged that carefully. You didn't know any of that. You just saw something wrong and decided to do something about it. I didn't know if I was right, I said. I almost didn't send the email, but you did. Yeah. He looked at the folder, then back at me. Take the weekend to think about it. Talk to whoever you need to talk to. The offer doesn't expire Monday. It expires. He glanced at the sheet. End of next Friday. He stood up to leave. Then he paused. For what it's worth, he said, my brother and I aren't speaking right now. Maybe we will again at some point. Maybe we won't. He said it the way people say things they've already processed enough to say without falling apart. But I'd rather know. You understand? I'd rather know what I was dealing with than close a deal and find out 6 months later that everything I'd built had been picked apart from the inside. I understand, I said. And I did. I took the job. I won't pretend the next year was easy. The M&A team was everything Warren had said. Demanding, relentless, the kind of work that followed you home in your head, even when your laptop was closed. I learned more in those 12 months than I had in the 3 years before them combined. I made mistakes. I fixed them. I made better ones. Warren Holt was not my supervisor. We didn't work closely together. We weren't friends in any way that would mean something to someone outside the building. But we understood each other, in the specific way that 2 people understand each other when they have shared a moment that neither of them will talk about openly. He said, "Good morning," when we passed in the hall. When I got my first independent deal closed, small, a mid-market acquisition, nothing that would make headlines, I found a handwritten card on my desk the following morning. It said, "Good work on the Kellerman deal. Keep going." That was all. No signature, but the handwriting was his. I knew it from the edits he'd made on the contract I'd watched him annotate 3 months earlier. I kept the card. Patrick Holt, from what I gathered through the careful peripheral awareness you develop in offices where information travels sideways, did not land well after his departure. The other interest he'd pursued turned out to be interests that required capital he hadn't fully secured yet. His name came up occasionally in the firm's hallways, the way names do when they still carry weight but no longer carry authority. Carefully, briefly, without settling anywhere. I felt something about that. Not satisfaction, exactly. Something more complicated. The particular feeling of watching consequences arrange themselves without anyone having asked them to. There's a thing that happens when you do the right thing in a situation where you weren't required to. People want to make it into a story about courage, or instinct, or character. They want it to be simpler than it was. They want there to have been a moment where I knew, clearly, that I was choosing correctly, that I squared my shoulders and made a decision. That's not how it felt. It felt like standing in a dim hallway with my keys in my hand and my jacket over my arm, hearing something I wasn't supposed to hear, and making 17 small choices over the next 40 minutes. To go back to my desk, to open the file, to trace the holding entity, to write the email, to delete it, to write it again, to hit send. Each one barely feeling like a choice at all, just the next logical step in front of me. I've thought about the version of that night where I kept walking, where I heard those voices and put my keys in my pocket and pressed the elevator button and went home and forgot it, where Warren Holt signed a contract Monday morning that quietly cost him something he'd built with his own hands. That version exists. It almost happened. I think about it more than the version that did. Last October, a full year after all of this, I was in the elevator when Warren got in at the lobby. We were alone for the ride up. 12 floors of silence, mostly, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. At the 10th floor, without looking up from his phone, he said, "How's the Waverly deal coming?" "Closing Friday," I said. "Good." At the 11th floor, "You eat?" "I had a granola bar at 2. That doesn't count." Still not looking up. There's a place on Wabash that does decent sandwiches. Tell them Warren sent you. The doors opened at 12. He walked out. I stayed on to 14. I stood in the elevator for a second after the doors closed again. Just the two of us gone from the same small space. The city outside the building doing what cities do. Indifferent, continuous, enormous. It wasn't a friendship. It wasn't a story with a clean ending. It was just the truth of what happened, the way it settled into my life without fanfare. A man almost lost something no one could have given back to him. I happened to be there. I made 17 small choices instead of 0. And now, a year later, in an elevator on Wabash, someone who barely knew I existed told me to eat a sandwich. Somehow that felt like exactly enough.